Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing today, Ken?
I'm well, thank you for asking, Rory. Both Rory and myself hope that you are well. You've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. It is the last podcast episode for 2022. It is episode 248. 3 topics that we're going to be covering today, starting off with theory and practice, where we're going to be looking at evaluating and improving your counselling skills. In Practice Partner today, where we look at elements of being in private practice, growing a private practice, we're going to be speaking about local SEO, that's search engine optimization, getting your website seen. How do we do that? And then in Practice Matters, where we look at an element of practice, what we may come across within our day-to-day running of a counselling practice in terms of presentations, or even just the office side of running things. But today, an interview with Dr. Jeremy Holmes, applying attachment theory and research in day-to-day counselling. And I know that you met up and conducted that interview, Rory, so we're all excited to listen to that. But kicking us off with an area that I know brings up a lot of, anxiety for so many, specifically students, and that is the application of counselling skills. Am I doing it right? Is a question that comes up again and again and again. And how do we evaluate the quality or use of our counselling skills, Rory?
Well, that's a very good question. And before I go on to answer that, I would say this is one of the most asked questions in our Facebook group. And if you are not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You'll find us, we're a closed group, but if you're not going to do, our friendly moderation team will let you in. And you can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people, all talking about topics in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. There are students, there are qualified colleagues, there are supervisors and tutors, and they're all debating very different and rich ideas within our profession. But yes, you come to the point of how do we evaluate skills practice? Well, this really, Ken, is where the rubber meets the road. When we're talking about theory in practice, there is no better way of seeing theory being shown in practice by evaluating skills. And the first thing we do is we practice our skills. This may be our reflection and paraphrasing, our use of silence, could even be use of questions. For those who are doing maybe more sort of courses with a more directive influence, such as CBT, this could be Socratic questioning, where you're trying to build up an idea of the client's ideas about how they perceive the world. But how we do it is we either record it on an audio tape or we video it and then we play it back and assess where we're at. And this has been something that's been around in the world of counselling and psychotherapy for nearly 60 years. Carl Rogers pioneered the recording of counselling skills with his students. And I was reading just the other day that they would huddle around the tape recorder and listen in wonderment, absolute wonderment, Ken, at how the use of these skills and the application, specifically of person-centered therapy, altered and help the client heal, and also to maybe have a different perspective on the world, to self-actualize within the terminology of person-centered therapy, to trust our organismic self. So the first thing we do, Ken, is record. And to do that, we need some form of recording device.
We do. And of course, we live in an age now where technology is changing almost daily. It was interesting to hear you refer to a tape recording, Rory. Oh, yes. I bet we've got a couple of listeners going, what is a tape? Because, of course, it's now solid state recorders. We get voice recorders. We can meet up over Zoom or an online app and record via that. In fact, that's how Rory and I are recording this podcast that you're listening to at the moment. We're meeting up over Zoom and we're recording the audio for you. So getting it recorded is really, really important. And so I guess the practice of skills, the confidence within skills, the am I doing it right within skills is an area of very, very special interest for me. I love counselling skills, and if you listen to the Counselling Tutor podcast often, you'll recognize that I run a little side project. It's called Counselling Skills Academy, and that is focused on getting that confidence in the skills, hearing other practitioners working, because I guess we're isolated in that we're asked to learn something that we might not be able to hear done by a practicing professional, other than maybe listening to Carl Rogers and the Gloria tapes or something like that, which was many, many years ago. So within Counselling Skills Academy, we have recordings of actual sessions that you can kind of listen to, but we also have an evaluation section to that training. And I'm going to share with you what the formula for that is. So for skills evaluation, you're 100% right, Rory. The first step of that is you need to get buy-in from a peer or somebody else that's on your course or a colleague, because I think that skills, working on your skills, maturing your skills is a career-long exercise. I don't think it's something we just do during our studies. So meet up with a peer or a triad, and a triad can be more powerful than a pair. And the reason for that is if you're working in a triad, you get to kind of, if you are just the observer, you get to remove yourself and not be involved in the actual transaction. And it gives you more thinking space, I guess one might say, to be able to take in what is being said, seeing both sides of that transaction and thinking, wow, how might I have done that? Did that work? How did that land? Whereas when you are in the interaction yourself, you're either the speaker or the listener, you can be caught up in the moment or the narrative or however that may take you. And then I guess if you're going to be doing this outside of your learning institution, you want to be looking at contracting around the content, specifically if you're going to be recording that. So if it's going to be recorded, maybe over Zoom and held on somebody's computer, that needs to be agreed of who's going to store that, what's that going to look like, are we going to share that file, how are we going to keep it confidential, I guess. You record the session using something like Zoom. This is what we suggest within our training. Watch the recording back at a later stage and evaluate the skills that we used. And then meet up with peers again at a different time and go over what your learning was from that and get their input. So if Rory and I were now doing a simulated skills session, we might record that. We might then end that session, go our separate ways, both listen to how that played out, and then come together as peers and compare our notes on that, Rory.
Absolutely. And there's a little bit of a secret if you're working in a triad, which is 3 people. So you would have the speaker, who would be effectively a client, but we call them the speaker, the person who's talking about what's going on for them. We have the listener, who is effectively the counsellor, who's listening and trying to understand where that person is coming from. And then we have the observer. And I think it's really, really important that if you're the observer, when you decided to give feedback, the observer should ask the speaker for their reactions first. And the reason for that is that it's all about them and their view of it. And by having the speaker speak and talk about what they felt, it means that the speaker isn't influenced by the observer, who may have some critique or some observations about how the skills session was conducted. So getting it from the horse's mouth, if I can use that phrase, first is really, really important. That sets you a bit of a benchmark. And then I would ask if I was the observer, I would ask the speaker what they did. And then I would give my feedback. And that way you're getting the visceral reaction from the person who's speaking, the client, if you like, first, how they experience the whole thing without any kind of undue influence. And I think it can be a bit of a nerve-wracking exercise. And I would say to anybody who's maybe doing counselling skills and recording them, don't be frightened. The more we know, the less we fear. I've always said this, and it's a sense of developing them and honing them. And this is it's certainly in practice, a lifetime endeavor, Ken.
Yeah.
You do that through, I know certainly I've been practicing for over 20 years, and I see somebody maybe on YouTube or at a lecture who's using skills, and I think, oh gosh, I think that's far better than the way I'm doing. That's far more effective. I might try and build that in. So don't get over anxious about it. We all have to develop. I can remember when I was a student, reflection and paraphrasing really came late to me. I was awful at it. I just struggled with it. I just really struggled. And my supervisor just said to me, just take your time, don't overthink it. Just stay with the client and it will come. And she was absolutely right. So I think in terms of executing, if you like, your skills, just practice. Practice is about getting, any practice is about going towards developing a skill and developing a mastery of that skill. And it doesn't come in the first week or 2 weeks. It's something that you build up and you practice. And learning from what we've done is really important. And it forms the basis, I think, of everything we do in counselling, Ken.
100%. And, technology is such that it makes it so much easier today. I mean, you were speaking about Carl Rogers and the original reel-to-reel tapes that they used that cost an absolute fortune at the time, and how everybody would crowd around that massive machine. Now you have a recording device in your pocket. If you have a smartphone, it can record. Now, of course, it's about contracting that you can record. But even if you're doing training skills, like observed skill sessions, you might say to your peer, do you mind if I record this, because I want to go back over and just check my skills? And I'm going to share with you now a little bit of a blueprint that you can use. So you can use this either if you are kind of recording up with peers and then coming together, as we've kind of discussed before. But you can also do this just on your own if you're able to record skills that you're using in a simulated session. So what we do is we listen back to the recording, and as you're listening to the recording, the speaker will speak. They will give their narrative, and then you, as the counselor or the listener, you might use a skill. So step one of the evaluation process is identify what skill is used. Write it down. Was it silence? Was it reflection? Was it paraphrasing? Did you use an open-ended question? What was the skill that you used? So narrative, the speaker speaks. You as the therapist, you use a skill. What was that skill? That is step one. Step two, identify what does the theory tell us about the skill? So let's say we're using a reflection. Well, what is the definition of a reflection? Go back to your textbooks, go back to your original training. What does a reflection do? And a skill will normally do something for the speaker, and it will do something for the listener as well. So for the speaker, if we're speaking about a reflection, the speaker might hear their words back. Their very words that they said, they will hear them back. Well, what does this do for them? Well, it makes them feel that they've been heard. It makes them feel that they've been understood. Sometimes for the speaker, it can be like they're hearing those words for the first time, even though they just mentioned them. It might be that as those words come back to them in a reflection, they go, actually, no, it's not like that. It's like this. So their very own words, they will have a change of heart in that. So that is the theory of the skill. So we have identify the skill. We look at what does the skill traditionally do? What is the theory of that skill? Then we look at the skill used in context within that session. What was the result of the use of that skill for the speaker or the listener? So let's go back to that reflection. The speaker says something, the listener reflects that back using the speaker's own words. What does the speaker then do? Do they go, yes, that's right, it is like that, and blah, blah, blah? Do they go deeper? Do they just go, and carry on with the narrative? What happens as a result of that skill being used? You can then take it a step farther and say, listening back in retrospect, if you were to go back to that very same presentation again, would you choose the same skill? Was it effective? Would you perhaps choose a different skill? If we look at skills, and I know they're not tools, but imagine them being a set of tools laid out, would you maybe go, a silence might have been better than that reflection at that point. Maybe I could have done a paraphrase as opposed to a reflection. Maybe I could have asked an open question there. So would you have used a different skill? And if so, what skill would you have used? And why? And I guess that is a way of evaluating your skills. And if you do that on a regular basis, you'll be so surprised at the difference it can make. It really does sharpen the skills, whether you're a student or whether you've been practicing for over 20 years. This is an amazing little blueprint you can use to evaluate and improve your skills as you go.
Yes, and I've made this blueprint available. So if you go to our mother website, which is Counselling Tutor, and you find podcast episode 248, you'll find that handout ready for you. You can download it, and you can use that to map out how you record your skills and how you evaluate them. And one of the best ways, I think, of evaluating skills is, yes, listening to what you say, but listening to the reaction of the person you're working with. That's the key thing. Recently, I was at a visit at the dentist, and in between having my mouth packed out with all sorts of things, my dentist said to me, my son struggled a little bit in maths, but now he's a coder. And I just said, so he found the maths that he loved. And her eyes lit up, and she said, yes, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's absolutely. And she couldn't stop talking about it. And it was almost like I had pressed a button that she felt understood. And I think you cannot underestimate listening to the client's or the speaker's reaction to the use of your skills, because it's at that point that the person feels heard, feels like someone is really, really listening and paying attention to them, where they may have not had that in the rest of their life, which is probably why they're coming for therapy. And that shows the movement, and that's what Rogers was listening to with his tape recorder. We have a gramophone at Counselling Towers. We wind it up, but that's what they were listening to. They were looking for client movement, that clients could feel that they are listened to, heard, understood. So I think that's the other part of the equation, isn't it, Ken? Yes, listening to how you apply the skills, but listening to the reaction of the person you're working with and noting that, because I think that is what we're there for. We're there to facilitate our client or our speaker's kind of way of being. We're there to help them feel that they're understood and their voice is important.
100%. I think this is such an important topic. The skills. So many people saying, I don't know whether I have full confidence in my skills. Am I doing the best I can by my clients? And the more we focus, the more we practice. Like you said, Rory, it's all about practicing. But it's having now a framework to practice within. You can get that super duper handout, as Rory has said, and you can get that counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, episode 248. It's right there on the page. You can download that. And of course, if you want to check out Counselling Skills Academy, where you can see 6 full sessions with the skills evaluated, then you can go and check that out as well. And that is Theory in Practice, evaluating your skills and practicing those. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by counsellingskillsacademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. And we now move on to Practice Partner, where we recognize that building a private practice or growing a private practice is something that many of us take on. And it can be challenging. There's many aspects that we don't train for within our formal counseling training. There's very little time that might be dedicated to how to set up a business and the legalities of that. And of course, we've covered a whole range of topics setting up a private practice in this session. And this is the last of the Practice Partner as we come to the end of this season. And we pick up again in January 23 with a brand new section in the center here. And today, Rory, we're going to be diving into SEO, or search engine optimization, which can sound terribly frightening, but really it's just a set of simple rules, and mostly for getting your website seen locally, Rory.
Yes, absolutely, Ken. And, websites, having a website, being on the web, you're in a crowded marketplace. It's a bit like, standing in the middle of a big town and seeing all these people milling around, all of them vying for your business. What makes you stand out? How do you find the person you want? And that's a very good starting point. Putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's looking for your service is always a good searching point. What are they looking for? What kind of things will they tap in to a search engine search bar to find you? And once you understand what they may be looking for, you're on your way to search engine optimization. So I'm based in Manchester, and I'm based in Tameside, and my website when I practiced was called Tameside Counselling.
Yeah.
And I worked out that when people went to search for counselling in my local area, they'd search for Tameside, which meant that if I was called Tameside Counselling, I'd have a better chance of being found. And what you're trying to do with search engines, and especially Google, I think, there are lots of search engines out there, but Google is the biggest and probably the most complex. We're trying to get Google to favor our website over others. And one of the techniques is to make sure that what people are searching for, they will find on your site. That's just a very basic starter, Ken.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important one, and it can seem so terribly confusing. But if you think of Google more in terms of a big library, so you mentioned, Rory, that you live in Manchester, so there's a huge multi-floor library in Manchester Centre. It is absolutely humongous, and there must be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of books in that building. So you go inside that building and now you want to read up on a certain topic. Well, how do you find a book if there are so many, probably millions and millions of individual pages within the books on the shelves, Rory? Well, you might go to the Dewey system. You might go to the little the drawer that you would open that's got all the cards in, and you'd start looking up the topic. So if I wanted something on needlework, I might open and I'm going to look for needlework, and it's going to tell me where I should go and look to find the books on needlework. But maybe I want needlework, specifically a certain kind, maybe sewing patches on clothing. So when I got to the needlework section, I might then scan those books and look for something that would cover patches. I might take a few books out and have a look at the table of contents to see if if it had what I was looking for, and then I would leave the library with the book that best matched my needs. Exactly the same thing is happening when somebody goes onto Google and they put in a search term. So going to Google, of course there are other search engines. I'm just using Google as an example, but you go into Google, you put in a search term. Google has got millions and millions and millions of pages that it references against. basically the whole of the internet that has been indexed. You put in a search term, there's a search that goes to say what is the best match for the search term that you have put in. So if I went onto Google and I put in needlework or patchwork needlework, I don't know if there is such a thing. This is me in my imagination working out that there might be, Rory. Maybe it wasn't the best example to choose. Yeah, I should have chosen something I knew more about. I might put that in, and the more the keyword that I type in matches what I'm looking for, the more chances of the searches being refined. Now, what refines those searches is the content that is on the page. So if I put in patch needlework or patchwork needlework, Google is going to look for those words, patchwork and needlework, and look at, are they together in the same article somewhere? And that is what it's going to bring forward for me. So going back to what you shared, Rory, your local area was Tameside. You offered counselling. So chances are the keyword that somebody looking for counselling in Tameside might put into a search engine is counselling in Tameside. So therefore, you would want to preempt what people would be looking for. And on your website, you would be putting there, my name is Rory and I offer counselling in Tameside. It's the exact match. So it's about putting yourself in your potential client's shoes, thinking what might they type into Google, and making sure you cover those words, those matching words on your website. So there's a great start. That's for when you're writing the content for your website. There are also some other things you can do specifically for local SEO. What I mean by local SEO is that your website will be shown to people in your locality, in the town that you're in the city that you are in. And specifically, if we're doing face-to-face in the room, this is very helpful. It's a very traditional way of getting clients. And one of the things that kind of favors you in Google is if you open a Google My Business account. So Google My Business, if you go on Google and put in Google My Business, you'll see it's absolutely 100% free. And what you're doing is you are registering your business with Google. It will have a little map and show where you are. You put in an address. They will usually send you something via the post with a little code in that you then have to go onto Google and put into evidence that you really do stay at that address. But it then puts you, it's like putting a pin in a map in the world, and it says Tameside Counselling is here in Tameside. And you can also add keywords to your Google My Business listing, as well as an overview of what you offer. And once again, when people are putting in counselling Tameside, it would come up in Google My Business. And because it is listed in Google My Business, that is a little tick that gives Google the knowledge that you really are offering that in that area. And chances are you may come up higher on the organic listings as well.
Absolutely, Ken. And the thing within Google, and we're going to use the term Google, other search engines, as Ken said, are available, but the reality is that Google is the biggest and most sophisticated, as far as I know, is that you're looking for authority and you're looking for accuracy.
Yeah.
So Google, as a search engine, is trying to make sure that when someone posts a website and advertises a service or any information, that it's accurate. It's a little bit like your tutor when you're at college or university. It's kind of checking out that you're the real deal, because in the past in the internet, people have put up false pages, advertising pages that when you land, they redirect you to something else. So Google's looking for authority. Looking for authority. And one of the useful things you can do on a website is actually add something like a blog post. So you can actually pop a post on. So maybe your speciality is working with bereavement. You can write just 100 or so words on bereavement, what people experience. Within that, you'd use keywords. So you'd use bereavement, you'd use loss, you might use the term funeral. You might use the word counselling, and you weave those words into your blog post, and Google then, when it scans, because Google has bots, and they're not little robots. I think these are algorithms, aren't they? These are computer algorithms. They're not little robots wandering around the internet having a look at your web page. What happens is that that's another way of showing Google or your web browser, the web browser, that you're authoritative. It's looking for authoritative. And I was just looking at our earlier podcast. We talked about evaluating counselling skills in practice. Actually, I made a bit of a rookie error. I have actually wrote it down as evaluating skills in practice. That is no good at all. What skills? So I've just written in evaluating counselling skills practice. And what will happen is that when Google crawls that, it will bring our page up. And it's just little things like that, making sure that you're authoritative, that what you're saying on your page is accurate, and that goes through to the links that you use. And this is really important. If you're linking to any information, external information, make sure those links work.
Yeah.
Because if your links go old, part of my job on a weekly basis is that I will get an email from my colleague saying somebody's reported a broken link on the website. And my job is to make sure that link's removed and another more accurate link is put in, current link, a link that's at work. Because if the link is broken, again, the search engines will see that as, well, kind of not best practice, and that will affect your ranking. It's a bit of an art, isn't it, Ken?
It is. Here's another quick tip on this one. Your name, address, phone number if you use it. In other words, your contact details. Put them onto your website. But make sure they are consistent with the contact details that you have on Google My Business. So on Google My Business, that becomes your go-to place. However you wrote your address on there, you want to be writing your address everywhere else. So if you advertise on a directory, so we've spoken about counselling directories in this section of our podcast just a few weeks back. When you put the details of where you are and where you practice from on that directory, you want it to match what is on Google exactly, because Google has the ability to be able to go see all of that information and map it together and go, aha, I see this person has a broad footprint. So an example of that, my last address was in a little town called Grappan Hall in Warrington. Now, sometimes I would use Grappan Hall in my address, and sometimes I wouldn't use Grappan Hall in my address because all my post would get to me anyway, and the postcode was always there, so people could always find me. But for SEO purposes, specifically local SEO, you want that to be consistent. You don't want to be using Grappan Hall sometimes and not using Grappan Hall other times. Look to what you put on your Google My Business and ensure that address is consistent across your online profile, I guess, for your private practice. Put your address on your website, usually on a contact page or in the footer. And then another great tip for local SEO is make sure you have a privacy policy on your website. Now, this is required by law. If you're running a business and you have a website, you have to have a privacy policy. And it is one of the Google ranking factors. When Google is going across using its algorithm, as you say, Rory, and it's looking at your website, if you've got broken links, it's kind of a little penalty shot. If you don't have a privacy policy page, again, it's a little penalty shot. And all of those, they are tiny little markers, but they do add up. And if you do have them, it just gives you more of a chance of getting in front of the people that are looking for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is even in the details. So if you're using a picture, maybe you're putting your picture in, put your name rename the picture as your name, because the search engines search every element of the web page, and they're looking for little key elements. So if you have a picture of yourself, and it could be, the picture, you may have saved it as me on holiday, change that, put your name in. So I put Rory Lees Oakes, counsellor, and pop that in. And again, that gives authority. In terms of the privacy page, it's really, really important to have a privacy page. And a lot of website developers will also have what's called a cookie pop-up. So you might go to websites and notice before you can do anything at all, you have to opt in to the cookies that you're allowing the website to have. It can be kind of frustrating. You've got the information, you click on it, and then that information's blanked out, and then you have this little page, half a page that comes up where you have to tick, marketing cookies, that type of thing. So it's really important that you have that, because that again shows that you're an authority site and that you're taking things seriously. I think we forget that virtually anybody can put a website up. It's so easy nowadays, which I guess is why some people may have their websites produced and may take SEO advice by people who are kind of specialised at it, Ken.
Very much so, and leave you with something you can search on Google yourself. It's local SEO audit. You can do a local SEO audit where you can there are free tools that will look over your website and give you suggestions on what you can do to improve your local SEO visibility. That's your search engine optimization visibility. It's a massive topic, this, and I think we could do a full hour on it. I don't want to go too much into the weeds in this, just to let you know that there are those simple things that you can do. Make sure you're on Google My Business. Make sure that your name, address, and phone numbers are consistent across all of your listings that carry your practice. As Rory has said, make sure you don't have any broken links on your website. So an example of that, if you are maybe linking to a local service and they can change their website and that link may break. So check your links on a regular basis and go on Google and put in local SEO audit and have a look and see if there's any improvements that you can make on your site. And of course, the big takeaway, make sure you have a privacy policy page there, because that is compliance, that is the law, and it just sets you as a professional. That's it. So that is Practice Matters. I hope that has been useful for you. That isn't Practice Matters. That was Practice Partner, Rory. We've got too many practices in our podcast.
Too many P's.
It's all the P's today. We're going into Practice Matters now, where we take an element of practice that we may come across or see while we're practicing. And today is something we see again and again and again and again, attachment theory. And this is with Dr. Jeremy Holmes. You met up with Dr. Jeremy Holmes, Rory, applying attachment theory and research in day-to-day counselling practice. There's practice again.
I know. It's been a practice type of podcast today, and indeed, yes. Well, as you know, as you rightly say, attachment is something that comes up so often in our therapy rooms. And I was delighted to interview Dr. Jeremy Holmes, who is a researcher in the discipline of attachment theory, and he's done a fantastic lecture for us applying attachment theory and researching day-to-day counselling practice. It's in our CSR and our CPD libraries. I caught up with him, and this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
Attachment theory is probably one of the most fundamental aspects of working with clients, whether it presents in the therapy room or indeed is part of your own makeup. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Jeremy Holmes, who has done a fantastic lecture in the Counsellor CPD and CSR library titled Applying Attachment Theory and Research in Day-to-Day Counselling Practice. So, Dr. Jeremy Holmes, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to meet you.
Yes, well, thank you very much. And
I'm always happy to talk about attachment theory, any time of day or night.
Well, there we have it. And it's interesting, isn't it, that that's a conversation that therapists have, to be able to talk about theories. And maybe we start there. Why is attachment theory so important in the canon, if you like, of counsellors and psychotherapists?
Right. Well, I just want to start by saying, of course, it's not that I'm anti-theory at all, but I'm also quite persuaded by that phrase some people may have heard, beyond memory and desire. You know, so when we encounter a client, in a way, we have to have an absolutely open mind. We don't want our theories rattling around in the room, because if so, they kind of interfere with our receptiveness to our clients, and they also may interfere with our clients' capacity just to be as open as possible to their own inner world. But having said that, we do, of course, need theory, and we need a whole set of theoretical tools that are going to guide us and help us and guide our clients and help them. And the reason why I think attachment theory is such an important and useful one is that attachment theory has one fundamental, very simple idea, and that is that when we're threatened or stressed or ill, our capacity to think, to explore, is put on hold, and we seek out an attachment figure who, in the case of a child, typically is an older, wiser adult who can help us deal with, metabolize or repair, protect us from the threat, the illness, the exhaustion, or whatever it is that has triggered off this attachment dynamic. So that's a fundamental idea which John Bowlby came to a long time ago now, 60 years ago at least. And it's very obvious, but it hadn't quite been spelled out before then. And the reason why I think that it's so fundamental to our work as therapists and counsellors is that if you think of what it's like to be a client entering into a consulting room where there's no structure and where you are going to, in some way or another, have to face up to your worries, your anxieties, your depression, your suicidality even. So you will be in an inherently threatened situation. And that means the attachment dynamic will be activated. And that's why I feel any first therapy session, and indeed any first 5 minutes of any therapy session, even if you've been seeing your therapist for many years, the attachment dynamic will not be far from the surface. There will be a feeling of anxiety. And it's the job of the counsellor to create conditions and create a setting in which that anxiety can begin to relax. And it's only then that exploration can occur. And there are some technical things which follow from this, all of which we know as counsellors and therapists. First of all, the setting, to create a safe, warm, non-interruptible, bounded environment. That in itself provides the security that is needed for the exploration that the client and the therapist, or the client and the counsellor, are going to undertake together. So that's the kind of very fundamental aspect of attachment theory, which I think applies in almost any therapeutic setting, and of course non-formally therapeutic setting, whenever you go to see a doctor, whenever you go to see goodness knows what, shall we say, a bank manager, whenever you're stopped by a policeman in the street. I mean, I had a letter from a police woman the other day saying, will you please contact me? And I immediately felt somewhat threatened. I thought, my God, have I done something that I shouldn't have done? Of course, actually, she just wanted to find out about a person she was investigating who I had treated, actually, now 30 years ago. So, well, I can go on, but maybe you'd like to interrupt and ask me a couple of questions.
Well, I think those opening statements are so useful. And, I was sat thinking that, you're absolutely right. When clients come into the therapy room, part of our work as therapists is, co-regulation to help regulate a client. And sometimes the phrase that's used, and it comes up in quite a few theories, this respectful reparenting, where we present ourselves as a solid figure that the client can co-regulate from us. Do you think that is an important part of being a therapist, to be able to produce that condition where somebody can feel co-regulated and the co-created relationship can develop?
Well, yes. I mean, I've got a slight reservation about this idea of using the word parent, because that immediately kind of might imply a kind of hierarchical relationship between the therapist and the client. And it is a collaborative conversation. That's how I like to understand. But nevertheless, it does enable me to move on to the next aspect of attachment theory that I think is highly relevant to most counselling situations. And that is the fact that the attachment relationship can take many forms, let's put it that way. And people tend to associate attachment theory with John Bowlby, an English psychoanalyst. But in fact, it was really co-created, to use your phrase, but with him and a North American psychologist, Mary Ainsworth. What Mary Ainsworth did was to study very carefully the different patterns which the attachment relationship can manifest itself. And she did this by creating a kind of experimental situation, but it's really an everyday experimental situation, which she called the strange situation. Well, the strange situation is actually not that strange. It's rather familiar. And what it consists of is a room to which a caregiver, let's call them a parent, and the child who's being studied, this would be a child somewhere between the ages of 1 and 2, is invited. And the child is given a chance to relax, to sort of get off the caregiver's knee or lap, to look around the room, and there are toys in the room to explore the room. And in that room, as well as the toys and the parent and the child, there is an observer, a neutral person. Of course, the child hasn't met before. So it's a slightly threatening situation for the child, but not very threatening, because they've got their parent there and because it's all friendly and safe. And then the child is subjected to stress. And the stress, which for adults might seem very minor, but for a 1-year-old in a strange room with a stranger is actually quite considerable. That is, the parent is asked to go out of the room for 3 minutes. Now, that 3 minutes is a long time for your 1-year-old away from your secure base. And the point that Mary Ainsworth researched and discovered, and subsequent researchers have looked at, is that children react in quite different ways in this situation. And they react in essentially one of 4 ways, and they each have a name. The securely attached child is one who, when the parent goes out of the room, usually stops playing, looks at the door, and they move over to the door, and they start to cry or express distress. The parent then returns and inevitably and quite appropriately will pick up the child and soothe the child. Now, that soothing brings in the word that you used, which is co-regulation. So the parent is kind of joining with the child to find a way to regulate the distress which they've experienced. And the securely attached child and the secure-making caregiver, the father or mother, mean that that child's distress usually evaporates, is regulated, is repaired within a relatively short time, and that child can then carry on, get out of the parent's arms or off the parent's lap, and start exploring and playing. Other patterns are the so-called avoidant pattern, where the child kind of doesn't seem to express much distress at all, hardly notices the parent goes out, but their play is somewhat inhibited. A third pattern is the so-called ambivalent pattern, where the child becomes very clingy and cannot really resume normal play. And finally, a smaller group in normal populations, but common possibly in the kinds of clients that come to see therapists and counsellors, is the so-called disorganized pattern, where the child behaves in quite strange ways, may kind of disown the parent, may lean against the wall, may even rock backwards and forwards or huddle up into a ball when expressed with this distress. In other words, is trying some kind of internal self-regulation, working on the assumption that there isn't external affect regulation to be available. Now, these 4 patterns I think, helpful when we are confronted with our clients in the counselling situation. The 4 patterns, we can see them in the ways in which our clients who come to talk to us about their difficulties use their language. And language is a kind of the adult version of the behavior that we see in the 1-year-olds. Mary Main another researcher in this area, made some really important links between the ways in which people talk about their experience and through longitudinal studies, how they experienced distress as infants. So the securely attached adults, they're the sort of the ideal client that you might say, sadly, one doesn't see that often. The kind of person where you really can have a very good session, you can have a very good dialogue, you can have a very good to and fro kind of conversation, one where affect may be expressed, it's often tears, but that affect is somehow something which the therapist can join in with and help discuss, understand, and soothe. So that would be the adult equivalent of the secure attachment. The avoidant attachment, I'm sure many of us therapists and counsellors have encountered this, are, as it were, those clients who don't have a language for talking about their difficulties. So you ask them, well, what sort of childhood did you have? And they might just say, oh, just fine, a normal childhood. How was your mum? She was just a normal mum. No detail, nothing vivid, nothing that you can visualize in your mind. So these are people probably who have learned that actually to have a kind of affect-laden conversation is not safe. These are defensive patterns. And you could say that the task of therapy is to help those individuals begin, as it were, to allow affect into their internal world because they're in a situation that feels secure enough for that to be able to happen. And just to complete the quartet, as it were, so the ambivalent individual may become very sort of clingy to the therapist, may not want to leave at the end of session, may ring between sessions. These are all normal patterns. They're not things to, as it were, complain about, but they need to be understood in terms of people who feel they can't depend on or expect reliability from their therapists in the way that they may not have been able to depend on and expect reliability from their caregivers. And so in a way there, the therapist, as it were, has to really work on boundaries and work on showing that within the firmness of the therapeutic boundary, they can be all ears, all eyes, all empathy. And finally, the disorganized pattern, which is the most difficult to deal with for us therapists, these are people who really find it difficult to trust their therapists. And all kinds of bizarre things may happen. They may miss sessions. They may come on the wrong day for a session. They may have a session and then on the very next hour, those kinds of things. And in addition to that, various forms of rather pathological self-soothing may occur. They may take small overdoses. They may cut themselves. So these are the clients that are sometimes called borderline clients. And there's a connection between disorganized attachment and borderline pathology. And here the therapist, essentially the therapist is going to somehow have to win the trust of that client, which may take weeks, months, years even. And eventually, in small doses, as it were, give the message that co-regulation is possible, that they can, as it were, share their difficulties with another person, and in that way draw on the other person's security for them to begin to understand themselves and to operate in more effective ways in their lives. So another long speech, sorry, but I'm open to more questions.
Well, no, I think you've outlined most of the questions I was going to ask before I've asked them, to be honest with you, and you've outlined attachment. I just wanted to clear up the reparenting style. Possibly comes from the work of Patricia Clarkson when she talked about repatriative style, and I think possibly there is a difference there. Repatriative is producing conditions of nurture rather than parenting. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Well, it's a really interesting, and I think it's a kind of hot topic and a hot debate.
Yes.
Sort of what exactly is the therapist doing? Are they, as it were, providing a missing ingredient, that a vitamin, as it were, that the client has never had in their lives? or are they somehow creating conditions in which that client can begin to grow their own vitamins? And I would say it's probably a mixture of both, and it depends on the client. I mean, there are undoubtedly some clients whose lives have been so deprived or so traumatized that having any kind of a listening experience, a nurturing experience, a loving parenting experience will be a complete novelty. So that would be the reparenting or repatriative experience. But there are others in whom what one is wanting to do is to, as it were, help the client grow some kind of small seed of nurture and love, which was there and is there, but has somehow been overlaid with trauma or loss or anger or envy. So it's probably a mixture of both.
Well, I mean, I think you've covered virtually all the questions I've not asked, which is absolutely brilliant. And the final question, as we come to the end of this interview, is what do you hope people who watch this lecture may take away from it?
Well, just a preface to that, I mean, I always say to my students and to myself, actually, if as a therapist you find yourself giving a lecture to your clients, which occasionally we do, then, there might be something slightly wrong. So the fact that I've sort of preempted your questions, I have to take some self-critical criticism for that. What do I want people to take away from the lecture? I suppose I want them to take away a kind of enthusiasm for these very simple ideas, which nevertheless provide a kind of a scaffolding, a framework, a structure within which the excitement, the creativity, the novelty, the gift, if you like, of being a therapist can flourish. And I feel attachment theory is a kind of an essential part of that structure. I'm going off in a completely different direction, but I went to an art exhibition by the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei years and years ago, and it was very tragic, really. There was a terrible earthquake in one of the regions in China, and the buildings, which were supposedly made of reinforced, had reinforcement rods in them. These rods were shoddy, and they'd been very badly built. The buildings collapsed, and many children died. And he kind of did an installation revealing that. Well, I think, in a way, you could say that theory, and particularly in this particular case, attachment theory, there are other theories that I think we need as well as counsellors, provide this kind of reinforcement that will deal with the earthquakes, which so often our clients bring to us, earthquakes of trauma, of feelings of suicidality, of sexual abuse, and so on. So I think, in a way, attachment theory is something which is both essential, but in a way invisible. It's like a reinforcing rod in a building.
Well, I think on that metaphor, applying attachment theory and research in day-to-day counselling practice is available in the CSR and the CPD library. And Dr. Jeremy Holmes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Big thank you to Dr. Jeremy Holmes. A big thank you to you, Roy, for reaching out and holding that interview. Really, really interesting. Attachment theory, we need to know it. It shows itself all the time. Understanding your own attachment style is interesting as well. And if you'd like to listen to the full lecture on applying attachment theory and research in day-to-day counselling practice, that lecture by Dr. Jeremy Holmes is available in the Counsellor CPD library and also our student resource library as well. That's the Counselling Study Resource. If you're a member of those, log in. That lecture is there for you. If you're not a member, then just go to counsellingtutor.com and all the information on how to join is right there on the homepage. Thank you for joining us for episode 248 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yeah, so we started with theory and practice, evaluating counselling skills practice. We moved on to practice partner, where we talked about SEO, search engine optimization, getting your website seen. And then we finished with an interview with Dr. Jeremy Holmes, who spoke about applying attachment theory and research in day-to-day counselling. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.